Hello there. Welcome to the latest offering from the Edinburgh Fortean Society. We're back to meeting in real life now on the second Wednesday of the month upstairs in the Beehive pub in Grassmarket. All of the details are posted on the relevant social media links as shown below. This is a talk that we did in the Grassmarket, and it's with Stuart Robins, a stalwart of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. The talk was originally planned as being a one that was going to produce during lockdown, so most of the talk is actually pre-recorded, so you're able to see that. Unfortunately, because you're watching this online, you are unable to participate in the excellent question and answer section that took place. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, Stuart Robins talking on Tales of Trees Bewitched, Weird Wanderings Among Scottish Trees. Thank you.
If you go down to the woods today, you'll have a brilliant time because they're full of ghosts, witches, fairies like me, and all sorts of cool stuff. Over a quarter of a century ago, historian and arborist Thomas Pakenham published this book, Meetings with the Remarkable Trees, and it totally changed the way I looked at them.
This is not a conventional book about trees. It will not help you identify them, let alone cultivate them. It's a personal selection of 60 remarkable individuals or groups of trees, mostly very large and mainly very ancient, and all with a strong personality.
Remarkable individuals like this one here behind me, known as Cromwell's tree, standing here alone in this field in Scotland, where his troops camped during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. On my wanderings, I've met many such remarkable trees, photographed them, taken bits of video. I've even hugged a couple of them. So this is a kind of cobbled together journey around Scotland in search of some of the more mysterious ones. On the banks of the River Tay in Perthshire grow survivors of a once great forest. This fine sycamore is over 300 years old, but its neighbour's the tree we've come to visit, and it's believed to be at least twice that age. The Burnham Oak, a quintessential example of a remarkable, or to give it a more proper name, a heritage tree. I mean, look, it even gets its own interpretation panel. A living legend. Well, at this point I think it's only fair to reveal the original name for this talk. In 2015, Storm Desmond nearly washed it away, with its lower branches propped up with wooden crutches. It's even had to endure an idiot lighting a fire in its hollow trunk. Somehow this medieval relic survives and just keeps growing. Burnham Wood features in a prophecy channelled by the witches of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
Round about the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw. Toad that under cold stone days and nights has 31 sweltered venom sleeping got. Boil thou first in the charmed pot. Double, double toil and trouble. Fire burn a cauldron bubble.
Could the old oak have been alive at the time of Macbeth in the 11th century? Nah, not really. But it would have been a handsome, well-grown tree in 1599, which is when Shakespeare is said to have visited Burnham as one of a troupe of travelling entertainers sent to Scotland by Elizabeth I at the request of King James VI. In the play, the Weird Sisters summon an apparition who appears as a child bearing a crown and holding a tree in its hand, who tells Macbeth,
Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Burnham Wood to high Dunstan Hill shall come against him.
Macbeth laughs. That will never be. Believing this means he will live out a full and victorious life. I will not be afraid of death and bane till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane. However, the prediction comes true in the play when his enemy, Malcolm's forces, use branches from the wood to camouflage themselves as they advance to attack Macbeth at Dunsinane Hill. And Macbeth comes to a sticky end, decapitated by Macduff. And what of the three witches? At a crossroads, just to the east of Forres, stands the Pictish Swernose Stone. According to local law, this is the place where Macbeth consorted with the witches. In the legend, the witches were imprisoned inside the stone, and should the stone ever fall, they will be free to seek their revenge. Thankfully, the shadowy deep state organisation, who were entrusted to protect us from such things, Historic Environment Scotland, have secured their prison by entombing it in this high-tech reinforced glass. So we are safe for now. Well, if you're anything like me, you'll often find yourself entering such words as witch and tree and Scotland into Google. And you might well end up on the website of Paul Bennett, the Northern Antiquarian, and a superb compendium of knowledge it is too. Similarly, the National Library of Scotland online map collection is an invaluable resource when it comes to antiquities and anomalies in the landscape. At the end of the 19th century, the Ordnance Survey included a curious landmark on their map of Wood, Witch Tree. It's not a tree we know a lot about, and it doesn't appear on the current maps. Perhaps it's long gone. However, the Northern Antiquarian has visited the wood and has claimed to have found it. So let's follow in his footsteps and see what we can find. This is the place, and it certainly matches the location on the old map. It obviously came down many years ago, which might explain its absence from modern maps. It's bigger and older than anything else here. At some point in its life, it's been impaled with many iron spikes, hoops and pegs, which are still here. The woodland shows signs of commercial activity, with felling, planting, and a nearby forester's house. Perhaps the old tree was too gnarly for good timber. Such trees were called granny pines by forestry workers. Or could it have been used to secure a skyline logging cableway to lower timber down the hillside? Perhaps this activity brought down the old witch tree, or was it blown over in a storm after the trees sheltering it were cleared? There's evidence someone tried to split the fallen tree with iron levers, a task that may have been hastily abandoned as the tools are still in place. And why witch tree? I'd certainly describe it as having what they say, a threatening aura. Could the old tree be associated with Kate McNiven, the legendary witch of Monsey? The local landowners in nearby Aberystwyth House had in their possession what they believed to be a magic ring given by the witch. It is said she could change shape into the form of a bee, a talent that cost her life. The story goes she cursed the people of Monsey as they lit her execution fires. The Laird of Inchbrake tried to stop the tragedy, and she rewarded him with the ring. And Kate McNiven's curse on the Laird and lands of Monsey? Writing around 1903, Miss Louisa Graham of Inchbrake states, Monsey has never since been owned from father to son. Monsey Kirkton still stands, but has grown smaller, and always an idiot dwells in the village. We're also close to the village of Dunning, and the mysterious Maggie Wall Memorial. Maggie Wall burnt here 1657 as a witch. Or was she? There's no mention of her in the University of Edinburgh's Survey of Scottish Witchcraft database. If you're not familiar with this grim but indispensable resource, the interactive witchcraft map is well worth exploring. Could it be the trial and execution of Maggie was never recorded? Tragically, according to the archives, a witch hunt did take place here in May 1662. Here, the following women were arrested for witchcraft and sentenced to death: Jonette Toys, Isabel McKendley, Elspeth Reed, Jonah Earth, Margaret Cross, Helen Ilson, Jonette Martin, Jonette Young. So is the monument to them, the inscription being inaccurately transcribed over the years and should read, Many were burnt here, 1662, as a witch. Or was it, as Jeff Hodder believes, the name of a place rather than a person? So the tree and its intriguing inclusion on the old maps remains a mystery. And perhaps all the better for it. What is certain is the dragon's skull, impaled by iron weapons, is a fine contender for Simulacra Corner. Marked on this 1867 Perthshire Ordnance Survey map, there's another curious feature, the Boggle Bush. In addition to measuring the physical landscape, the Ordnance Survey also marked the position of local cultural and historical features. Thankfully, this time we have the surveyor's field notes to help us interpret it. These OS name books, as they are called, were compiled using interviews with local people, preferably authority types. So here we have the name of the landmark, the Boggle Bush. Possible variations on spelling. They were particularly keen to agree on the correct spelling of a place. Up until then, you could pretty much write place names however you liked. The names of those who verified the spelling, so we have Mr. Robert Miller, Mr. James Stewart, and Mr. Fraser. And a description.
This name is applied to a birch tree situated on the north side of the road leading from Socha to Kinrossy. Mr. Miller says that there is a superstitious tradition existing in the locality that bogles have been seen at this tree.
It has to be said this isn't actually a birch tree, it's a sycamore. But certainly it looks like a place where such creatures might reside. What's a boggle? Like its regional counterpart, the boggard, it's a kind of generic term for a supernatural being. Anything from a ghost to a scarecrow, a brownie, to a huge beast. We'll pay it a visit. And typically, it's getting dark. But as Robert Louis Stevenson once said, there's a romance about all those who are abroad in the black hours. Perhaps they're hiding in here. Boggles are not necessarily evil. Most accounts describe them as being a bit mischievous or annoying. But it's said that if anything happens to the tree, a great calamity will befall Kinrossy. At the end of the 19th century, the trunk started collapsing. To prevent this, a band was forged and fitted by Kinrossy blacksmith and Kirk elder David Gray. In 2000, a local councillor raised concerns to ensure its precarious roadside position doesn't allow it to be condemned. So if you find yourself driving along the lonely stretch of road between Socha and Kinrossy, please drive with care. We wouldn't want any harm to befall you, the Boggles, or the village. Up to Aberfoyle in the Trossachs and the mysterious case of the Reverend Robert Kirk. Kirk was born in the manse at Aberfoyle in 1644, where he became minister and a scholar, occupying himself with such pursuits as translating the Bible into Gaelic. He was also a bit of a Fortean. Throughout his adult life, Kirk took copious notes on the various beliefs of his practitioners regarding fairies, the phenomenon of second sight, doppelgangers, and similar matters. In 1691, he condensed these into the wonderfully titled The Secret Commonwealth, an essay on the nature and actions of the subterranean, and for the most part invisible people, heretofore going under the name of elves, fauns, and fairies. To Kirk, such phenomena sat relatively comfortably with Christian belief, and he hoped may help prove the existence of Christian entities such as angels in a backlash to an increasingly agnostic world. Kirk's manuscript was handed to his eldest son, but was lost until 1815, when it was rediscovered by none other than Sir Walter Scott. The original remains in the library of Edinburgh University, and the book is still in print today. Now we come to the strange death of the minister. There's a hill next to the village, which has a reputation as being a fairy hill. We know that he walked there daily. Some say it had become an obsession, coming back night after night, lying down with his ears to the ground, listening for noises emanating from the fairy realm. It is said that he normally only left when his wife came to get him, anxious as she was over his nightly escapades. Then one night, after yet again failing to return, his lifeless body was discovered on the hill and returned to the village. He was buried in the old churchyard at Aberfoyle, but many of his congregation believed the coffin contained a changeling, or merely weighed down with stones. They believed his spirit was taken into the fairy hill and resigned in a lone pine on the summit. Whether he's buried in the churchyard, trapped inside the pine for revealing the secret commonwealth, or parting with the fairies inside the caverns and halls beneath Doon Hill, we'll never know. But what's clear is the pine has become a wishing tree. This wish to the fairies, for example: for my husband's money dreams to come true. I'm not going to pass comment on the practice of leaving stuff on trees. It's a contentious subject and one I intend to dodge as best I can. Personally, I'm a take-only photos, leave-only footprints sort of guy. I'm largely unjudgmental about people, unless they're in authority, and in particular in government, in which case I'll happily sling mud at them all day long. With all these old wishing tree and well sites, it's considered bad luck to remove anything. Not only might it stop the wish working for the person who left it might also transfer any problem or illness they were wishing rid of to you. At the somewhat debatable geographic heart of Scotland grows its oldest living inhabitant, the Fortingall Yew. No one's quite sure how old it is. There are some guesses at between 5,000 and 10,000 years. More rational and likely estimates are that it's 2,000 to 3,000 years old, which is still pretty staggering. Yews don't really age like other trees. Bits die off, usually the central core. But new growth can sprout from just about anywhere, which is why it's near impossible to accurately date these ancient trees. This cycle of death and rebirth has been revered by pagans and Christians alike. Here in Fortingall, it was traditional for the funeral procession to pass through the tree on their way to burial. A portal to the afterlife, as we could see in this 19th century engraving. In the 18th century, the antiquarian Thomas Pennant visited the tree and reported,
"In Fortingall churchyard are the remains of a prodigious yew tree, whose ruins measured 56.5 feet in circumference."
Strangely, for such a central location, this area of Scotland is quite remote. There are no railways, A roads, and few through routes. The old ways seem to have endured longer here than in other areas. Thomas Pennant also noticed that the tree had been damaged by bonfires lit to celebrate the pagan festival of Beltane.
Perhaps it's just as well that you won't be here tomorrow to be offended by the sight of our May Day celebrations here.
Similarly, the local community would gather together in the neighbouring field by Bronze Age burial mound to celebrate the Celtic festival of Samhain. They would build a bonfire on it, link hands, and dance around the mound. To all accounts, this celebration was still going on well into the 20th century. Known as the Cairn of the Dead, it also seems to have been reused in the 14th century as a place away from the churchyard to bury victims of the plague. This area is rich with stories about the Cailleach, the divine old witch, and of Celtic saints ridding the land of plague. According to legend, the corpses were brought here on a sledge drawn by a white horse, led by an old woman. The Celts believed a white horse had the ability to travel between their other world and ours. Could it have been the Cailleach herself who brought her followers here to be buried? Or was it just a local hotel owner looking to cash in on some dark tourism? As the fame of the tree spread, tourists came, and some of them started taking cuttings as charms. Parts of the tree were even turned into souvenir quakes. So, sadly, for its own protection, the old yew was walled up. If you visit the tree today, you can be forgiven for being somewhat underwhelmed. It's a shadow of its former self. But as a true ancient, it absolutely deserves our awe and respect. When some excavation work was being carried out last century, they unearthed this ancient cut-marked rock by the tree. And in more recent times, botanists were surprised to discover that one small branch in the outer part of the tree has switched sex and is now bearing female berries. So, the old tree still has some secrets to tell. This sycamore is thought to have self-seeded in a blacksmith's scrap heap. A campaign to protect the tree was launched in 2007 by local author John Barrington, who said the tree was one of the great wonders and a freak of nature, and it now has protected status. He said, the seedling grew up through this pile of scrap metal on which the local blacksmith had thrown all kinds of things. As it grew, it swallowed up and took with it hundreds of bits and pieces of metal. As it became stronger, the blacksmith would prop up or hang various articles such as the anchor or a heavy chain, which he would leave and forget about. Gradually the tree absorbed them too. If you look closely, you'll see various nuts and bolts and even a bridle in there. It's believed the bicycle once belonged to a villager, conscripted during World War I, who left it hanging on a branch. Maybe he never came back. Or perhaps on his return, he found the tree had claimed the bicycle as its own. But I have my doubts about that story, as I'm sure I've heard it somewhere before. The tree has long outlived the blacksmith, Hugh McGregor, who died in 923, aged 82. And according to experts, the tree's iron diet has done it little harm at all. On this 1858 map of Renfrewshire, you'll find the intriguingly named Kissing Tree on the summit of Ferenni's Braes. According to the legend, if a young man could drive a nail into the tree with a single blow, he would earn a kiss from his sweetheart. On the way up, we have a fine example of a Neolithic cup and ring marked stone. Or is it? Word on the street is a local man carved this bit of rock art with power tools in the last 10 years. But look above it, and you'll see the legendary Lone Tree. In Rambles Around Glasgow, published in 1854, Hugh MacDonald writes,
Leaving the glen at its upper extremity, we now proceed along the summit of the Ferenni's Braes in a northerly direction and speedily arrive at an old thorn well known as the Kissing Tree. The stem and branches of this sturdy old bush or tree are thickly studded with nails which have been driven in from time to time by youthful lovers who are in the habit of visiting the spot. From the roughness of the wood, it is no easy matter to send a nail home into it, and the swain who manages to accomplish the feat in presence of his sweetheart is held fully entitled to a fond kiss on the spot.
The observant of you might have noticed it's not a thorn. The original tree fell shortly after Hugh MacDonald's visit. This beech is now the tree that has inherited its name and position. In Celtic times, the hawthorn, or May tree, was a symbol of fertility, youth and sexuality. It is thought that most marriages took place at this time of year, usually at Beltane. Hawthorn would have been in full bloom, bringing abundant blessings to the newlyweds. There's no sign of the tradition persisting into the 21st century. Although strangely, we did find evidence of local youths demonstrating their prowess at driving a different sort of metal object into the bark. The side of the tree is peppered with air gun pellets. And now a quick pilgrimage to a holy well close to the town of Dumfries. This fine avenue of trees leading to it is known as the Cracken Beeches. And next to the well is an archaeological site known as Picts Knoll, or Hill of the Picts. There's a debate whether this is a henge or a fort. Either way, it shows this area has been inhabited for a very long time. We tend to take fresh drinking water for granted a bit in 21st century Scotland, but it really is the sacred foundation of life. In pre-Christian times, springs were important places of worship, and water was a key element in Celtic mysticism. Many of these spiritual practices involved some kind of offering given to or left by the water. As Christianity spread from Ireland to Scotland in the 6th century, many of these springs were assimilated into the new faith, blessed and rebranded as holy wells. The Celtic goddesses and spirits associated with them were replaced by saints. In this case, St. Ciaran, who was a 6th century abbot of Kintyre. The wells became popular with pilgrims on the way to major religious sites like Whittle. They believed that praying at these wells and shrines might cure them of illness or forgive their sins and give them a better chance of going to heaven. In the 19th century, the well was cleared out and they found coins dating back to 1560. Any dating earlier would probably have been dissolved by the spring water. The coins came from all over, Scotland, England, Ireland and even France. In addition to coins, we have offerings of cloth or cluties and trinkets which are left on the branches of the trees around the well. Although wells were considered Christian shrines, many of the practices and rituals surrounding them date back to pagan time, and the most popular time to visit a well was Beltane, or the first Sunday in May. This particular well was held in great repute for the cure of diseases, particularly in women and children. After the Reformation, the wells were viewed by the Church as, at best, Catholic, at worst, witchcraft. The Presbytery of Dumfries in 1614 declared the well idolatrous. In 1629, the Privy Council again denounced them in the strongest terms.
Now, it was declared that, for the purpose of restraining the superstitious resort in pilgrimages to chapels and wells, which is so frequent and common in this kingdom, to the great offence of God, scandal of the Kirk, and disgrace of His Majesty's government, that commissioners cause diligent search at all such parts and places where this idolatrous superstition is used.
In many cases, the wells were destroyed to prevent people from using them. However, sometimes the wells were reopened in secret by the local population. In 1650, a woman named Janet Dixon was reported to have taken her young, sick child to the well. She washed the child and its clothes in the water, then
ran thrice with skins round thorn tree beside the well.
For this, she was tried and convicted as a witch. For all that, as we can see, the trees around the well are still in use. And the tradition of using spring water to heal illness lived on through the Victorian spa boom and into the present day. When I did the first incarnation of this talk to the Fortean Society in 2017, there was one site I wanted to visit and include above all others, and this is it. And it's not an easy place to visit for all sorts of reasons. Loch Marie in Westeros is 20 kilometres long, and it's the largest freshwater loch north of the Great Glen. It's a spectacular location, with its backdrop of mountains, including the mighty Slioch, or the Spear in Gaelic. But it's the islands we've come to visit. There are more than 60 of them scattered across the loch, isolated from the land and now a protected scientific reserve. They hold the nearest thing to natural woodland left in Britain, a fragment of the ancient Caledonian pine forest with a seed bank stretching back into prehistory. These islands have had little interference from people or grazing. This really is Scotland's lost world. That is, except one. Isle Marie. This is a Victorian Ordnance Survey map of the island. We can see it is heavily wooded and there's a path running north to south. There's a well, a burial ground, and a mysterious circular structure in the middle. The mapmaker's notes say, on the island there is an old burial ground and has a dried up well, which has some curious tradition about it. Thomas Pennant, in his 1775 book, A Tour in Scotland and a Voyage to the Hebrides, describes the Holy Well as a place of pilgrimage for cases of lunacy. It was believed that if a patient drank water from the well, they would be cured of any mental illness. And beside the well, as Pennant writes, was a tree which acted as an altar, where people would leave their offerings to the Saint Melrua. This photograph, from a century ago, shows the well and the oak tree. You might just make out coins in the bark and clooties hanging nearby. In 1877, Queen Victoria stayed at the Loch Marie Hotel with her trusty friend, John Brown. This is from her diary. Sunday the 16th of September 1877. A most beautiful bright morning.
Went with Beatrice and the Duchess of Roxburgh in a 4-oared gig, steered by the landlord of the hotel, and were rowed across to the Isle of Marie, which one cannot see from the house, as it is concealed by some of the larger islands. It was lovely on the blue, calm loch, passing through those wooded and rocky islands, and not a sound, excepting that made by the oars. The boat was pushed on shore, and we scrambled out and walked through the tangled underwood and thicket of oak, holly, birch, ash and beech, which covers the islet, to the spot where there is the celebrated well, now nearly dry. It is said to be celebrated for the cure of insanity. An old tree stands close to the well, into the bark of which it has been the custom from time immemorial for everyone who goes there to insert a copper coin with a hammer as a sort of offering to the saint, Saint Melrua, who lived there in the 7th century. Some say that the name of Marie was derived from Melrua or Melrog, as the saint is also sometimes called. There are also rags and ribbons tied on the branches of the tree. We duly put and hammered in some pennies. Went on to where there are some very old gravestones. amongst which 2 of a Norse or Danish prince and princess, about whose untimely death there is a romantic story. The remains of the old wall of the monastery are still to be seen. The island is barely a quarter of a mile across and in circumference. Walked along the beach and picked up pebbles. Then rowed back as we came, which is 20 miles. 4 very decent-looking young farmers rowed the boat.
It's important to note the trees she mentions. The other islands on the loch are pristine Caledonian forest of Scots pine and juniper. Isle Marie, on the other hand, is covered in a whole pick and mix of oak, ash, Scots pine, willow, birch, hazel, holly, sweet chestnut, and obviously has been like this for a long time. And this island has had an even more illustrious visitor. Back in 1979, His Majesty Tom Weir knocked a coin in here during an episode of Weir's Way. St Melrua, also known as Muri, which is where the loch and island get their name, was an early Christian missionary who came to Scotland and helped found the monastic community of Applecross in 673 AD. He seemed to have assimilated much of the local pagan traditions, almost to the point of going native. Certainly many pre-Christian practices survived here long after they had declined elsewhere. There are 17th century church records that refer to bull sacrifice on the island.
Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ!
There are also many references of local people referring to the saint as a god, the god Muri. It is said that he stayed on the island as a place of retreat. And there are remains of what appears to be monastic cells and a circular stone structure that could be part of those or predate it. It is thought the island was sacred to the Druids, the loch being aligned from east to west. Some also believe it has connections to the moon goddess, which might account for the island's reputation for curing lunacy. The cure worked like this. Before docking, the boat with the ill person on board would circle the island 3 times clockwise. On each lap, the patient, who had a rope tied round them, would be plunged into the freezing water. Upon landing, the patient was taken to the well and given some of its water to drink. Then an offering was made by nailing a rag or a ribbon to the tree, or by driving a coin into it edgewise. Similar, but perhaps less drastic rites were recorded right up until 1952. Naturally, the post-Reformation Church was not too impressed by such activities. In 1656, the Presbytery of Dingwall proclaimed,
"And with all their adoring of wells and other superstitious monuments and stones, tedious to rehearse, have appointed as follows, that whosoever shall be found to commit such abominations, especially sacrifices of any kind or at any time, shall publicly appear and be rebuked."
And in 1678,
Mr. Roderick Mackenzie, Minister of Gairloch, summoned by his officer to this Presbytery Day Hector Mackenzie in the parish of Gairloch, as also John Murdoch and Duncan Mackenzie's sons to said Hector, as also Kenneth Mackenzie his grandson, for sacrificing a bull in an heathenish manner in the island of commonly called Elian Muri, for the recovering of the health of Christine Mackenzie, spouse to the said Hector Mackenzie, who was formerly sick and valetudinaire.
now to the burial ground, on one of the reputed Viking graves. Legend tells that they are a prince and princess who died tragically in a test of faith. Very similar story to Romeo and Juliet. And this is the grave of the last person to be buried on the island, Alexander Robertson, owner of the Loch Marie Hotel. In 1922, the hotel provided a fishing party of 30, with packed lunches of potted wild duck paste sandwiches imported from London. They went out for a day on the loch, but they nearly all became seriously ill. 8 people lost their lives within a week. The worst botulism food poisoning tragedy in Britain. He was cleared of all charges, but died not long after. Some say of a broken heart. Others say suicide. In his 2018 book, the author and naturalist Bob Gilbert introduces us to an urban landscape haunted by ghost trees. Can our environment really be haunted by such things? Well, let's ask him. Hello, Bob.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Ghosts and trees, that ticks quite a lot of boxes for me. Can you explain how a tree becomes one of the undead?
It's not so much spectral, Stuart. It's based on a concept that actually exists in ecology, and it's a concept of something called ghost hedges. In the medieval period and onwards, as we were creating enclosures and the thousands of miles of hedgerows that we have in this country, we did it in a variety of ways. And sometimes they were planted, but at other times, actually, what happened was you took a woodland and you destroyed most of the woodland for planting, just leaving a strip of it to separate the fields and stop the livestock wandering. And within those strips, you would actually have the seed bank of a lost woodland. So for years and years to come, actually, you'd have these woodland plants springing up along these hedgerows as a kind of shadow, a remnant of what once was. And so they were called ghost hedges. Really just taken that idea, the idea that there are many features, although they are lost, still leave in some way their mark or their influence on the land. These ghostly remnants of the tree, they can manifest themselves in all sorts of ways. For example, it might just be in place names. I mean, I live in Poplar, a part of the East End of London, where the whole area is named after a tree which is no longer found here. This was the marshlands where this was the commonest tree. There isn't one of them left now, but the whole area still bears that memory of what the land was. But there are other, for example, sometimes in the layout of a street or the layout of an estate, you can actually see the field boundaries are still preserved that were once there. Or sometimes the influences are more subtle still. So that again, they enter the kind of cultural memory of the area. And here in Poplar, for example, both the council and the local housing association developed logos for the area, which incorporated this tree which is no longer.
So in Scotland, socky means willows, and a haw is a kind of river meadow. So does that mean somewhere under the TK Maxx on Socky Hall Street, there's a lost rural idyll?
Almost certainly there is. I mean, place names do reveal a great deal about what was previously in an area. I mean, in London, I counted 36 different place names, different locations, not streets, but areas of London which were named after trees or woods. And if you and then other features as well, like meadows or rivers or farms or wild features. One of the things I did in my book was trace, and these are another kind of ghostly impact on the landscape. I traced the route of a lost river using just the contours of the city streets. So we followed this whole river called the Black Ditch through East London. I actually doused it with a water artist as well. But to be honest, I think tracing it through the geographical features and the contours of the pavement was probably more successful than our dousing.
So have you actually ever encountered a ghost tree that is itself haunted?
I suddenly remember that as a child, my siblings and I, we actually believed that this is in the heart of Bermondsey in South London, that a tree next to the railway arches, we really believed it was haunted. And the ghost was called Percy. I have no idea why it was Percy or what Percy might have done. And they certainly occur a great deal in literature. I know you are familiar with M.R. James, and one of the best stories of a haunted tree is the ash tree. But Wordsworth had this idea that all trees are a kind of ghostly memory of the earth. So that all trees in a way are ghosts. And I must just say, in concluding on this question, lots of trees do have particular spirits attached to them. And in particular, if you look into the story of the hazel in different parts of the country, the hazel has the hind etin, it has the melch dick, it has milk churn peg, depending on what area you live in. So, I mean, I do love that idea that particular trees have particular protective spirits attached to them. And whether I believe in them or not is a different matter. But I can tell you, I would not cut a branch of hazel without asking protection from the spirit first.
So, if something lost from the past is left etched into the fabric of our environment, one might almost be forgiven for thinking, well, maybe, but not quite. We'll see. Right, let's go ghost hunting. Here we are in Corstorphine, Edinburgh, and I sense a presence is close. So where is the sycamore? I mean, this thing was massive, over 4 centuries old, and at one time considered the largest in Scotland. The tree is commemorated as a symbol of the village. It's the badge of the local bowling club, and it's here in the street names. The story goes, a monk brought the tree as a sapling from the east in the early 15th century. It grew tall and outlived the castle in whose grounds it was planted, of which only the old dovecot remains. But on a dark and stormy night of the 26th of December 1998, the old tree came down. But if you visit the excellent Corstorphine Heritage Centre in the old Dower House, you can see fragments of the great tree and some of the items that were carved from its fallen timber. So here lies our ghost tree. But this is a double haunting, as the tree itself is haunted by another ghost. Christian Nimmo, the White Lady. Back in 1679, Corstorphine Castle was owned by James Bailey, a defeated royalist and rake who had fallen on hard times and was up to his ears in debt. James was uncle to Christian Nimmo, a married woman. Neither of these facts stopped Bailey, and Christian ended up bearing his child. And now he was carrying on with one Bessie Ritchie, and had got her pregnant too. The elders from the local church met to discuss their outrage at the laird's fornication. But, given that in their words, "This lordship is a person of quality," they fudged it. Meanwhile, Christian took matters into her own hands. On the evening of the 26th of August, 1679, Bailey was out drinking, and Christian sent word for him to meet her under the sycamore tree. There she confronted him about his infidelity. Bailey was drunk. "In which condition," Christian said, "he commonly was very furious. He lunged at her with his sword," claiming she grabbed the sword to save herself. But in the ensuing struggle, Bailey accidentally impaled himself on it. Whoops. Arrested, she was taken to Edinburgh Tolbooth jail. Christian confessed to murder. It's likely she spent the last day of her life behind the door of the condemned cell, which just happens to be downstairs. You'll pass it on your way down. After a couple of failed escape attempts, she was beheaded at the Mercat Cross on the 12th of November, 1679. Her method of execution was the maiden, an early form of guillotine, which is now on display at the National Museum of Scotland. But her spirit returned to haunt the tree. A market gardener in the nearby Woodbine nursery claimed that he'd often seen her ghost and referred to her as his White Lady. And in 1981, a weaver at the Dovecot studio beside the tree saw a ghostly woman walking down the grass towards the road. And we actually have rare photographic evidence. It's on display at the Heritage Centre. As with all these pictures of ghosts, you need to use a little bit of imagination. Could just be a light anomaly. But if you look closely, you can just about make out the white outline of a ghostly figure. Some say that you can even see the bloody murder weapon in her hand. It was a very special tree. It was a botanical species in its own right, rejoicing in the name of Acer pseudoplatanus corstorphinesis. It doesn't produce seeds, and it can only be propagated from cuttings. When the Reverend James Oliver saw the tree in 1795, he noted that in the end of May and the beginning of June, it exhibits an appearance of the most striking beauty. The side which is exposed to the sun, in the colour of the leaves, is of the richest vivid yellow hue. And though the grand old Corstorphine sycamore may have gone, several of its children, grown from cuttings, are thriving. 2 stand tall in the nearby park, and this one in the churchyard of the Kirk is becoming a worthy contender for the title of the Corstorphine sycamore. Throughout history, trees have been good to us. They've provided us with materials for warmth, shelter and food. And of course, being us, we've also used them to kill each other. From the moment we picked up the first stick and beat someone with it, to the technological advancements in weaponry, from ancient warfare through to the Renaissance and beyond. The ash was favoured for spears, the yew for longbow, and the poplar for arrows. But all those things are fashioned from wood. What about an entire living tree being used as an instrument of death? Once again, our insatiable appetite for killing finds a way. You could bend a couple of strong branches down, tie someone to them, and then let them spring back. Apparently, This was a punishment for adultery in the Roman army, which is strange because I've watched I, Claudius and I rather got the impression that this sort of behaviour was compulsory. But it was more usual simply to hang someone from one. The gallows tree, or as we called them in Scotland, Boggle Trees, which derives from the Gaelic word meaning grief. These were used for public hangings in less populated areas where a purpose-built gallows, as we would have had just outside here in the grass market, didn't make economic sense. And who would be entrusted to keep law and order? Naturally, those who had most to lose should it collapse. It's no surprise then that it's not uncommon to find a Boggle tree in the grounds of a stately home. It's reported that in the 11th century, Scottish King Malcolm Canmore legislated that every barony was to have a tree for hanging convicted men and a pit of water for the execution of convicted women. Tradition has it this old sycamore at Leith Hall in Aberdeenshire was used as gallows to hang convicts. The hall was built in 1650 and was a family home for nearly 300 years, and in 1945 it was gifted to the National Trust for Scotland. Naturally, the place is full of ghosts. A World War I soldier, a little girl, and the sound of spectral bagpipes and drums. The best-known apparition is of John Leith III, who was killed on Christmas Day in 1763. He was shot in the head during a drunken brawl at Archie Campbell's Tavern in Aberdeen. Unsurprisingly, he's said to appear as a moaning man with a bandage over his eye. But, before you think this sounds like a comedy series, most disturbing of all are the guest reports of nightmares of a face bending over them, and the feeling of hands at their throat, or as if they were being smothered with a pillow. Of course, hangings aren't just a punishment for offenders. They are a warning to others. Think of the lynchings by American white supremacists in the 19th and 20th century. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. This is Gallows Hill, just north of Dundee. And the old beech tree you can see on top is believed to be just that. And as we found, a surprisingly difficult tree to reach. We were actually beaten back on our first attempt by fading light, snow, and the mother of all fortified scout camps. On our second attempt, we tried an assault on the left flank, and were nearly foiled again by the sheer amount of fallen trees, toppled by storms Arwen, Malek and Corrie. During the Second World War, this was RAF Douglas Wood, a top-secret coastal early warning radar station, one of the most powerful weapons in what is today known as the Wizard War. Eat your heart out, Harry Potter. It's now a bit of a magnet for the Urbex community. Rather them than me, you need ropes to get down and back out, and the place will be full of asbestos. But we got here, and you can see there are plenty of horizontal limbs to choose from. Absolutely perfect for a good clean drop. This tree must have been the end for a lot of people, and so it is for us. Hey, hey, hey. Train. Fucking plane now.
Look! It's in the trees. It's coming.
Thank you very much for that, Stuart. Much enjoyed it. As I say, all of our talks are, for the moment at least, taking place in real life. So if you want to know what's happening next, please have a look at all of the details below. Those are the links that will take you to the various portals that we have where we give information about our talks. And where possible, we'll try to put something up online to complement the talks. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the talk, Stuart. Thank you, everyone.